Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you this morning. Thanks for coming out on this cold Sunday morning. It's cold. I think it's going to get worse. And so we are. But man, we've got the furnaces working. It's warm and comfortable. And we're glad to be able to be together this morning. We are studying in this Sunday morning class some Psalms, just a few selected Psalms written by King David, recorded, of course, in the book of Psalms. And my intention this morning is to wrap up this study. We actually have two Psalms left if you've been looking at the study guide. We've got two Psalms left, but they both deal with the same time period in David's life. And so we're going to try to cover them both this morning and wrap up this study of the Psalms. So we're going to be looking, first of all, at Psalm 3. Psalm 3, and then we'll move to Psalm 63. Now, as we've been saying in all of our studies, handed down tradition as to what were the circumstances that prompted David to write some of the various Psalms. It's not inspired information, but it's pretty well believed to be accurate, sort of a handed down tradition through the centuries as to what was happening with David when he wrote a given psalm. Some of them seem absolutely certain to be true. Others maybe a little bit questionable, but pretty good accuracy on these traditions as to what was behind the writing of the Psalms. Both of these Psalms, Psalm 3 and Psalm 63, it is believed that David wrote these Psalms in the context of when he had to flee from Jerusalem because his own son Absalom was coming to take over the throne. His own son Absalom leading a rebellion against his father. And the threat was real and severe enough that you remember the story. David had to flee out of Jerusalem. Let's read just a little bit of that history real quick to set the stage for what David will be writing in these Psalms. 2 Samuel 12, verse 10, you remember that after the sin with Bathsheba, when David was confronted by Nathan the prophet, Nathan said this. Nathan made this prophecy as to how things were going to turn out in David's family. 2 Samuel 12, verse 10, now therefore the sword shall never depart from thy house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house, and I will take thine wives before thine eyes, and give them unto thy neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of this sun. For thou didst it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. So Nathan prophesied David's going to have trouble, and the trouble is going to arise out of his own household. Skip over to chapter 15. 2 Samuel 15, verse 1. It came to pass after this that Absalom prepared him chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate. And it was so that when any man had a controversy, came to the king for judgment, that Absalom called unto him and said, of what city art thou? And he said, thy servant is of one of the tribes of Israel. And Absalom said unto him, see, thy matters are good and right, but there is no man deputed of the law of the king to hear thee. Absalom said, moreover, oh, that I were made judge in the land, that every man which hath any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice. And it was so that when any man came nigh to him to do him obeisance, he put forth his hand and took him and kissed him. On this manner did Absalom to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Skip down to verse 13. There came a messenger to David, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. And David said unto his servants and that were with him at Jerusalem, arise, let us flee, for we shall not else escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring evil upon us, and smite the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servant said to the king, behold, thy servants are ready to do whatever my lord the king shall appoint. And the king went forth, and all his household after him. And the king left 10 women, which were concubines, to keep the house. Skip to chapter 16. 2 Samuel 16 at verse 20. 2 Samuel 16, verse 20. And said Absalom to Ahithophel, give counsel among you what we shall do. And Ahithophel said to Absalom, now this Ahithophel had been a close counselor to David, remember. And Ahithophel said to Absalom, go into thy father's concubines, which he hath left to keep the house, and all Israel shall hear that thou art abhorred of thy father. Then shall the hands of all that are with thee be strong. So they spread Absalom a tent upon the top of the house, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Notice the specific fulfillment of prophecy there that Nathan had made before. Chapter 17, verse 1. Moreover, Ahithophel said unto Absalom, let me now choose out 12,000 men, and I will rise and pursue after David this night. And I will come upon him while he is weary and weak-handed, and will make him afraid, and all the people that are with him shall flee, and I will smite the king only, and I will bring back all the people unto thee. The man whom thou seekest is as if all return, so all the people shall be in peace. Real quickly, let's go to chapter 18. Chapter 18, verse 9. Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under a thick bough of a great oak, and his head caught hold in the oak, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. Verse 14, then said Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. And he took 3 darts in his hands, and thrust them through the heart of Absalom, while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. Skip to the end down there at verse 32. Well, my pages won't turn this morning. 18:32. And the king said to Cushai, the young man, is the young man Absalom safe? And Cushai answered, the enemies of my lord the king, and all that rise against thee to do thee hurt, be as that young man is. And the king was much moved, and went up from the chamber over the gate, and wept. And as he went, thus he said, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. All right, that's a real quick overview of that situation with Absalom. A horrible thing, to be sure. But remember that Nathan had prophesied this was going to be the case, and this was part of the consequence of the sin that David had committed with Bathsheba and the murder of her husband Uriah the Hittite. And so all of that was coming to pass as a consequence of the sin that David had committed. All right, so let's go to Psalm 3. Keep in mind that we think now that this psalm and the next one we'll look at were written in that context. Those were the circumstances that David was dealing with when he wrote this psalm. Psalm 3, verse 1. Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. But thou, O Lord, art a shield for me, my glory, and the lifter up of my head. I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill. I laid me down and slept. I awaked, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for thou hast smitten all mine enemies upon the cheekbone. Thou hast broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongeth unto the Lord. Thy blessing is upon thy people. All right, so when David says, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me, verse 1. I don't think that's an overstatement to you. So here's David, the powerful king of Israel, and yet Absalom has schemed and worked so successfully to turn the hearts of the people to him and away from his father that literally David had to flee from his own throne. And the few loyalists that he had with him, they had to get out of Jerusalem because it was clear they would not be able to resist Absalom coming and the forces that would be with Absalom. And so I don't think it's any exaggeration at all when David said, how are they increased that trouble me? Many there are that rise up against me. He had the opinion clearly that he was overwhelmed, that he was outnumbered. And other people were of that same opinion. Verse 2, many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. And so, not only was David feeling overwhelmed, but plenty of other people were of the opinion, David won't survive this. David won't last. There's no hope for David in this circumstance. Do you remember as he was fleeing from Jerusalem that there was this man Shimei who went along the road as David was fleeing, and this man Shimei went along throwing dust and rocks on him and cursing him as he went. In 2 Samuel 16 verse 8, Shimei says to David, now get the scene here. David's on the road. He's heading east out of Jerusalem. Shimei is going along the side of the road, throwing dust and rocks on him, just totally, shaming him. And Shimei says, 2 Samuel 16:8, the Lord hath returned upon thee all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose stead thou hast reigned, and the Lord hath delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom thy son, and behold, thou art taken in thy mischief, because thou art a bloody man. And so, that's just one example of the kind of people who were saying, David deserves what he's getting, and he'll never be able to resist Absalom and the people who are with him. So, just take a breath here for a minute to say, what kind of trouble have we faced recently? What kind of troubles you've been dealing with? All of us deal with troubles from time to time, right? How bad are your troubles? I don't know. Troubles can be pretty troubling at various times in our lives. I don't think any of us have faced what David was facing here in this circumstance. A rebellion against his authority as king that was coming from his own son, and the hearts of the people had turned away from him, had turned to Absalom. And plenty of people who, if you were in Israel at that moment, you probably also would have been of the opinion, David is not going to survive this. He's not going to continue as king. His life will not be spared. If Absalom ascended to the throne, he would have had to kill David, his father, for sure. And there were plenty of people. If you were looking at the political scene, you would have said he'll never make it. He will not survive. So those are the kind of odds that he was facing. Tom?
We look at those individuals that Absalom circumvented prior to coming to be. We sort of read it, and it sort of sounds like here you had a couple people coming, and they were from, this tribe or that tribe. Evidently, these people that were coming were bringing the cases for that tribe to David, and Absalom circumvented them, made the influences to them. So when they went back to their tribe, their allegiance, the whole tribe was aligned with Absalom.
So he was basically saying, you really don't have a voice. Boy, I wish I was king. I would be on your side. And so he was a politician. He was the classic politician there. Say what people want to hear. Right? That doesn't say at all what he would have done if he had actually ascended to the throne, but he was a classic politician. He was saying what people wanted to hear.
Hey, Greg.
Yes.
I think earlier you had a question, and I would compare that to us a little bit. And I think back on my life, as brief as it's been hopefully so far. And I think of every time I was riding high, like on a roller coaster, every time that I went down, it was self-inflicted.
Okay.
It was either carelessness or, I don't know, got too big for my britches.
So we cause ourselves a lot of trouble. There's no doubt about that.
Not David.
And David brought this on himself by the way he had lived, and it was prophesied. Because of what you did, this is what's going to happen. And so that's very often the case with us too. A lot of times the trouble we deal with is because we haven't been the people we ought to be. I think that's a fair observation. I think you're right.
Even in the case of Shimei, his response to him at that time, I think one of the two brothers, Rishai, or I can't remember which one, said, let me kill his dead.
Let me take his head off.
Get rid of him. And he says, no, maybe
Yeah.
He's still mature enough to think, well, maybe God's punishing me in this part. I've got to deal with it, and I'm not in the actually. So
Yeah.
we see, even though he didn't get any retribution for that sin, he's still mature enough, not reacting in a heated way.
Yeah, yeah. David's reaction to this is kind of impressive, that he didn't just lash out. He accepted that this was probably the reality of what was happening. To what we just said, I would make the caveat: not all of the troubles that come to us are deserved. Many of them are. Many of them are the result of our own misdeeds and miscalculations and mistakes and misjudgments. But it is true sometimes that evil people put upon us what we don't deserve. Now, David's saying, I think David understood he deserved what he was getting here. But you know, the ultimate case is Jesus Christ, who was a totally innocent man. And look at all the trouble that people heaped upon him. So many of our troubles are our own doing. Sometimes we get what we don't deserve. In this case, I think David's in that first class, and he understood that to be the case. Notice he said, let's see, there was a reference here. David describes the Lord: "Thou art a shield for me, my glory, and the lifter up of my head." Verse 3. What do you think that expression, "the lifter up of my head," what do you think that might mean? What phrase would we use? I don't think I've ever used that phrase in normal conversation. What do you think? How would you say that? Anybody?
He pulls him out of the troubles. He lifts him away from his troubles.
Yeah. It's a reference to the discouragement that he was in, and the Lord would lift him out of that discouraging situation that he was in. Again, David had to be particularly troubled because this was his own son, and he realized that this had come about because of his own misdeeds. Sometimes we get discouraged like that, but God can lift up the head. Notice he says in verse 4, "I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill." What do you think? He heard me out of his holy hill. What do you think that's a reference to?
The temple was built, or the temple's not built yet, where they brought the ark is on the Mount Zion, and around there is a hill, and ultimately that will be built to God. Reigns on high above everything.
Yeah.
Probably figurative as where you sit on high above all.
I think that's it. I think it's a figurative reference to where God is on his holy hill. Just go back to the previous Psalm, Psalm 2, verse 6. "I have set my king upon my holy hill of Zion." So the temple would ultimately be built on one of the hills where the city of Jerusalem was situated. So this is just a figurative expression relative to the presence of God. And so he says, I prayed to God who is on his holy hill. And it's a bit of praise and acknowledgement of God. He says in verse 6, "I will not be afraid." We'll get back to verse 5 in a minute. Verse 6, "I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people that have set themselves against me round about." Is that an exaggeration? Oh yeah, 10,000. There's 10,000 people against me. Is that exaggeration?
Probably in this situation, it's not.
In this case, exactly.
I mean, if you take basically there were peoples from every tribe that aligned with Absalom. And when you look at, when they called men to, of fighting groups, there were thousands that came from each tribe. So where the army of Israel could have been one of the largest armies of that time.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think it's exaggerated. Go back to 2 Samuel 16, verse 15. 2 Samuel 16, 15. "Absalom and all the people of the men of Israel came to Jerusalem." So, and then when the battle was engaged in chapter 18 at verse 7, the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David, and there was there a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. So, when he says 10,000 are against me, I don't think he's exaggerating. In the battle, actually, there were 20,000 casualties on Absalom's side. So pretty overwhelming odds. Wayne?
The American Standard says 10,000 plural. So we would say that tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands, right. And like I said, we know at least 2 tens of thousands were killed or casualties in the battle that ensued. So he's not exaggerating. Again, the point that I think we want to take away from this is, how bad are our troubles? How bad is your trouble? What have you been dealing with? What's the thing that's been particularly troubling you recently? Have you had tens of thousands of people trying to do you in? We just haven't, have we? We've had trouble. We all have trouble. Trouble is a standard part of life. But we haven't faced troubles like David did. Now here's the other side of that then. David was facing troubles the likes of which we have never known, and yet notice he had not lost his confidence in God. He was still trusting in God. Verse 4, I cried to the Lord with my voice. He heard me out of his holy hill. And notice he says he had such confidence. Verse 5, I laid me down and slept. I awaked, for the Lord sustained me. You know, it would be hard to sleep when you're facing the kind of challenge that David was facing. All of us have had the experience of losing sleep over something you're worried about. You know, in fact, we even use that experience. I lost sleep over that. You know, something that was terrible, something bad, some issue you're dealing with in your life. Man, I lost sleep over that. David said he didn't lose sleep. David said, I could lay down and sleep. And the reason why was because he had that confidence in God that God would deliver him. Any thoughts, anybody, on any of that? All right. So he says in verse 8, Arise, Lord, save me, O my God, for thou hast smitten all mine enemies upon the cheekbone. Thou hast broken the teeth of the ungodly. It depends a little bit on the timing of when this psalm was written. There seems to be an inclination that he wrote this psalm before the outcome was fully known. It seems to me that this psalm was written while it was still up in the air as to how this was going to turn out with Absalom. Because all the verses leading up to this have talked about how many are against me, but I've put my trust in God. So if that's the case, and I don't know that you could prove that one way or the other, but if that's the case that David wrote this psalm before the outcome was known, notice the confidence that he expresses in God, because verse 7, he speaks in the past tense. So arise, Lord, save me. O my God, for thou hast smitten all mine enemies upon the cheekbone, and thou hast broken the teeth of the ungodly. Now that's been true in the past in David's life, but I wonder if that past tense usage there is a way in which David is expressing his confidence God's going to deliver him again. That it's like it's already done. I'm praying to him to do this, and I believe so much in God, it's like it's already done. Any thoughts, Tom?
You know, there's been a number of promises that God's made to him. One, that, you know, descendant of his would sit on the throne. Absolutely, descendant of his, you know, so, you know, he has that. But he also knows the things that Nathan told him about, you know, that the sword wouldn't depart from his house. So, you know, he sort of knows that, you know, God has basically sustained his reign as king, even in this onslaught from Absalom. And then he's going back and he's thinking a lot about Absalom. You know, there were things that he could have done with the situation of Tamar and things that David didn't do that sort of prompted Absalom to take the course that he took. So David, you know, has a sort of thought with Absalom that, well, yeah, he's against me, but, you know, that's sort of my fault too. And it goes on. So I've got to deal with it. How do I deal with it? Well, if I kill him, that's going to be, you know, a harder situation than letting God take care of it.
Okay? He's certainly putting his trust in God here, that's for sure. But he has full confidence. I think that's the thing I see in that so much, is that he has confidence. He puts his trust in God, and he doesn't waver from that. Verse 8, salvation belongeth unto the Lord. Thy blessing is upon thy people. So he trusts God, and he knows that God is the ultimate determiner of how things will turn out. And so full trust and confidence in God, I think, is clearly seen here in David. So, yes? All the way back to David and Goliath. Yeah. Remember what James was just saying. We're going to deal with a good bit of that in the sermon this morning. I think it's a good intro to what we're going to be talking about in the sermon this morning. So trust in God. God delivers. And David definitely did that. All right, let's go quickly to Psalm 63. Turn over with me to Psalm 63. We think, and all the indication is, and the tradition handed down with this psalm is also in this same context of him being pursued by Absalom. Psalm 63, verse 1. O God, thou art my God, early will I seek thee. My soul thirsteth for thee, my flesh longeth for thee in a dry and thirsty land where no water is, to see thy power and thy glory, so as I have seen thee in the sanctuary. Because thy loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise thee. Thus will I bless thee while I live. I will lift up my hands in thy name. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips. When I remember thee upon my bed and meditate upon thee in the night watches. Because thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. My soul followeth hard after thee, thy right hand upholdeth me. But those that seek my soul to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth. They shall fall by the sword. They shall be a portion for foxes. But the king shall rejoice in God. Every one that sweareth by him shall glory. But the mouth of them that speak lies shall be stopped. Okay. Again, I don't think we have to talk anymore about the sort of what we believe to be the context or the setting wherein this psalm was written. Verse 1 is kind of a well-known verse, some phraseology there that we're familiar with, that we even use some in our singing. Early will I see, my soul thirsteth for thee, my flesh longeth for thee in a dry and thirsty land where no water is. That's, could have been literally true, that he was in a land where no water, a dry and thirsty land where no water is, because he had to flee Jerusalem. We think that he had crossed the Jordan, was on the east side of the Jordan, hiding out from Absalom and his followers, maybe even literally lacking for basic necessities. That was kind of the situation that he was in, literally. I don't know. Again, we've all had our troubles and trials. And sometimes we feel that way. We just feel like, we're alone and apart and without help in a dry and thirsty land where no water is. But David says that he was longing, verse 2, to see thy power and thy glory as I have seen thee in the sanctuary. So David, says, I want to see God fulfilling his promises, acting on my behalf as I have seen him in the past. Now, when he says, as I have seen thee in the sanctuary, obviously David did not go into the sanctuary. He wasn't authorized to go in there. Remember when King Uzziah later would do that, was struck as a leper when he went in and tried to offer sacrifices and he wasn't qualified. He didn't meet the qualifications to be a priest. And the priest came, it pertaineth not unto thee, O King Uzziah. And he was struck with leprosy. David didn't literally go into the sanctuary part of the tabernacle. And so this would be a figurative expression. But David had experienced the power of God plenty of times in his life. David says there's something, notice, thy loving kindness is better than life. My lips shall praise thee. Thus will I bless thee while I live. I will lift up my hands in thy name. He suggests that God's loving kindness was such a blessing, better than life itself. I think you'd have to say that's true. So, what are we facing here and hereafter? Well, no matter how bad things got, the loving kindness of God is a greater blessing than life itself. So, what if some terrible calamity would come upon us and our lives be taken? It could be any number of things, but something horrible happens and we die. The loving kindness of God that we've experienced in this life endures that toward eternity. So even if troubles or calamities prevailed against us, God's loving kindness is more precious than that and will prevail. Verse 5, my soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips. And so, David had that confidence. We can have that confidence too, that God's loving kindness prevails over everything and is more precious to us than life itself, because it endures toward eternity. Verse 6, when I remember thee upon my bed and meditate upon thee in the night watches. You ever done that? You ever been facing challenges and issues, crises in your life? So much so, we said earlier, David said he could lay down and sleep because he trusted God. But sometimes those troubles, keep us awake in concern and anxiety and worry. Probably all of us have had the experience of laying awake at night and thinking about things that we're dealing with. David said when he was laying awake at night, he remembered God and meditated upon him in such instances. That's really a sign of the trust that that David put in God, because he didn't say, I laid awake at night and I kept thinking, what can I do? What's the next step I can take to try and resolve these problems? How will I get myself out of this mess? He didn't do that. He trusted in God and thought about God, which is surely a lesson for us as well, something for us to contemplate. He says, verse 6, because, the reason he did that was because thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. Again, David is basing this confidence that he had upon things that had already transpired in his life. And he'd had lots of good blessings from God and a lot of deliverance. God had already delivered him in many instances from his enemies. He had confidence that God would do that again. And so he said he would rejoice in the shadow of his wings. What's the illusion of in the shadow of thy wings? We use some of that sort of figurative language we find in our songs that we sing. Wayne?
Under God's protection.
Yeah.
As a hen would gather her chicks under her wings, as Jesus said, a vision. But there seems to be this whole context, the concept that David, oftentimes when we have problems, how could God do this to me? But David had the understanding that this was his doing. And I think he is constantly reminding himself, this is all my fault. God is my deliverer. Look what I've done.
Yeah.
And instead of being downcast, as we read the previous song, he lifts up his head because God is with him.
Yeah.
And even though all of this stuff that he's having to endure is there too, God is still with him.
Exactly right. And I think that is an example that we ought to imitate. We need to have that kind of comfort and consolation, knowing that God, if we do what's right, God is on our side. Even when we've made mistakes, when we've repented and turned back to Him, God is on our side. And we need to sense that consolation. Tom?
Back up there at verse 5, my soul is satisfied in all of that. It's like the satisfaction goes deep down into him, and because of that, he's able to, offer praises with his lips to God. He's got that, basically that contentment that he can face anything.
Okay.
Sometimes I feel that deep down in my bones.
Yeah.
It's sort of a similar type thing.
Yeah.
That we have such assurance that it radiates down in our deepest point of our being.
Yeah.
To where
Well, that's true. I think that's true. Now, I had not looked at verse 5, marrow and fatness, that way. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness. I think marrow and fatness would be an expression to those people of delectable foods. And he's saying, I will be satisfied as though my plate was heaped over with delectable food. God blesses those who put their trust in Him. There's just no doubt about that. Verse 8, my soul followeth hard upon thee, thy right hand upholdeth me. What would be the imagery of being upheld with God's right hand? Yeah, that's strength. That's an expression of strength, right? Because most people are right-handed. Most of us who are right-handed, if we have a particularly heavy thing to lift or a hard object to move, we would prefer to do it with our right hand because typically that's where our strength is. And so he's just saying, God will uphold me with His strength. Those that seek my soul to destroy it shall go into the lower parts of the earth. They shall fall by the sword. They shall be a portion for foxes. They shall go into the lower parts of the earth. That may be simply an expression of death and the grave. It might be more than that, but at a minimum, it's an expression of the fact they will die and be buried in the earth. It might be a reference to Hades and torment or punishment there. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't think you could prove that at all. But he's just saying they're going to be destroyed. They're going to suffer. They shall fall by the sword. There'll be a portion for the foxes. That is, their carcasses will be eaten by wild beasts or be a prey. I think there, instead of foxes, we don't typically think of foxes being a scavenger kind of animal. But I think there, my notes suggest that this was more literally jackals rather than foxes. And some translations will probably have it that way. And so he's saying, my enemies are going to die, and their carcasses will be prey for the scavenger beasts. He had that kind of confidence. And then finally, the outcome of this, the king, that's me, right? He's talking about himself right there. He says, the king, me, I shall rejoice in God. Everyone that sweareth by Him shall glory, but the mouth of them that speak lies shall be stopped. I think it's significant there that his kingship was in doubt, right? He's being pursued by Absalom, and it could turn out badly. It could turn out that not only is he not the king anymore, but he's not even alive anymore. How does he conclude it all? The king, that's me. So what's he saying? I'm going to survive this. I'm going to overcome my enemy. The king shall rejoice in God, and everyone that sweareth by him shall glory. So he has, again, this full confidence that God was going to deliver him. All right, I think there's, in these couple of Psalms, 3 and 63, which we both think sort of have a common circumstance that prompted the writing of it. There's some real takeaways there for us. If you stop and think about it, it's more than just talking about the history of David and his life. It's more about thinking of David and the way that he approached the troubles that he was dealing with. We've sort of seen that in all these Psalms. You know, we went all the in this brief study of the Psalms, we were talking about how David was being pursued by King Saul and unrighteously threatened with death because he didn't deserve what Saul was doing to him. Through all of that trouble, through the trouble with Bathsheba's and the sin, and through the trouble that prevailed after that, we just keep seeing how David continuously put his trust in God for all things, and we need to really learn from his example. David, a man after God's own heart, not perfect, but a man after God's own heart. All right, thanks for all your help in our study through the Psalm. Lord willing, next week we want to go to the New Testament. We've been out of the New Testament for a little while. We'll go back to the New Testament. We want to study the book of Acts, but we're going to do it in a little different way. We're not going to go verse by verse in Acts. What I'd like for us to do, and there'll be some study guides printed. I haven't got them printed yet, but maybe even before the end of the day today, we can have some for you to use this week in your studies. We're going to look at characters in the book of Acts. So we're going to look at the book of Acts, but by virtue of looking at different individuals who are described to us in the book of Acts and what we can learn from them. Next week's lesson, in fact, will be about the author, Luke, and the one to whom he addressed the book of Acts, Theophilus. And so, the Lord willing, we'll start there next week. And if you'll watch, hopefully by this evening, we'll have some study guides on the table in the back to help you with your preparations. Thanks, everybody.